back. You're still watching the India development debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and let's take this across to the other big story that we've been on top of, and one that refuses to die out of the headlines: the RBI versus the government. Some signs of a thaw are appearing in the slugfest between the government on one hand and the central bank ahead of the crucial board meeting of the RBI next Monday. We learned that the government is likely to push for easier NPA norms for small enterprises and some relaxation in the framework for prompt and corrective action against public sector banks. The government is of the view that RBI's stringent guidelines have crippled banks' ability to lend and the economy at large. In a big climb down, the top bosses at RBI may have agreed for a special package for small businesses, even as it provides a breather to weaker banks on a selective basis. Now, this even as the centre insists on its right to issue directives to the banking regulator under Section 7 of the RBI Act. Going by the signs, looks like both sides are ready to bury the hatchet, preferring to avoid a big showdown ahead of the RBI board on the 19th of this month. The early signs of thaw in the strained relations, or is the governor and his deputy being put into a corner, is what we are discussing and debating right here on the show this evening. Let me take this across to our special panel that's joining us right here. Maithili Bhusnurmat, our consulting editor at ET Now, Mr. R. Balakrishnan, independent consultant, and of course, Mr. M. Govindarao, former member PMEAC of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So thank you each one of you for being with us. And I think to call it a slugfest or to call it the gloves are off is all hyperbole. There is a definite disagreement, and a very loud and a vivid disagreement between India's government and India's central bank. It's only fair to ask then that reports that are now coming to the fore which seem to suggest that the RBI, some of RBI's board members are willing to talk to the government. Are these early signs of thaw that we are seeing in what really looks like a very cold, climby relationship? Maithili, let's begin with you.
Yeah, so it's good, I think, that some board members seem to be having, second thoughts about it. But frankly, all these years, Supriya, the Central Board of the Reserve Bank of India has not played a very active role. It's by and large been a fairly passive board. And I think this is something that just shows that the central boards, the role might be changing, because now that we have, the government has appointed two fairly, if I may say, vociferous and articulate quote-unquote members to the board. So I think the role of the central board is changing. They are asking questions which in the past was not the norm for the central board. So I think this shows that there might be some change both in the role of the board and also, as we are seeing, perhaps in the composition of the board. In the past, the composition of the board was quite different, and by and large the board members took their role, I would not say not seriously. They did take it seriously, but they seldom questioned the governor or the deputy governors who also attended. So I think this is a sign, perhaps, I'm not so sure of a thaw, but certainly it is good that some of the board members are willing to kind of talk, play, as it were, a facilitating role between the RBI and the government. I think somebody needs to step in, and it's good if some of the central board members are doing that.
No, absolutely, and I think the central bank's board needs to play a more decisive role in terms of at least bridging the differences, and we'll come to the role of the board and how it has changed and the tenor and all of that in just a bit. But Mr. Govindarao, the question really is that should we see the willingness of some of the board members talking to the government as a sign or an early sign of thaw in this slugfest, or should we actually attribute this to the governor and his deputy being further cornered in this equation right now?
Well, let me clarify an important issue in the RBI Act. In fact, RBI Act authorizes the governor to undertake all the functions of the Reserve Bank, all the functions of the board of the Reserve Bank of India. In fact, it has been authorized to do that. And therefore, in the past, all the governors have taken all the call. Now what has happened is that, this is a new development, that the board has been sort of propped up, and then, board has the powers, and the RBI governor himself has all those powers. He can exercise those powers. Now, this is what I was told by one of the former RBI governors. Anyway, now the point is that, there are much deeper issues than simply solving this particular problem. This problem will come and go. Urjit Patel may go, Urjit Patel may stay. That's not the issue. The issue is there is a much more serious issue of a conflict of interest which the government has. It's the owner of the bank, and it is asking the regulator to say that you do this, you do that, and for that purpose it is using the board, its nominees, because it appoints the board. Now, I mean, obviously everybody knows that the RBI's autonomy is within the framework given. But, there is a much more, the serious issue is, I mean, there has never been an attempt at reforming the commercial bank system, but then increasing the ownership of the commercial banks, and then asking the Reserve Bank, saying that, look, I mean, you do it, you take my call on this. Anyway, I mean, of course, the showdown has to, this particular issue may show down, but I think the basic problem between the RBI and the government will continue to persist.
Okay, so the basic problem, because the bone of contention is not going to be resolved here, will persist is the word that's really coming in from Mr. Govind Rao. But Mr. R. Balakrishnan, given the noises that we saw, given the poll positions that were taken, and now, of course, we are seeing some board members willing to talk, do you believe this is going to lead to relations, some kind of a thaw there, or is this going to further accentuate poll positions on both sides? That's question number one. And question number two also is that are we seemingly seeing the role of the central bank's board changing here? I mean, so far they've been, they've kind of supervised stuff. They've not really dealt into decision making at the RBI. For the first time, we are given to understand that there was a bloody showdown on many things as far as liquidity management and all of that is concerned in the last board meeting, which had to be adjourned. Are we seeing a different tenor of sorts as far as this new board versus management at RBI is concerned?
Well, I think as an external observer, I can say that I think from what we have seen of RBI so far is that they were always above reproach or beyond criticism. We would always take them at their face value. We would probably give our opinion saying they should have done this, should not have done this. But if you go back and see the actions, I think they have not come out with shining colors. So I think the government is trying as a promoter of an organization to assert its right and saying you do this, you do that. This I think is extremely bad, because what has to be done had to be done behind closed doors. It should not have come out in the public. I think a lot of dirty linen is getting washed in this in terms of, I think the RBI is not equal to a LIC of India where you take any kind of decisions and nobody questions. I think the whole world watches what you do to RBI. So to that extent, I think the fault lines are visible, because the government should not have made this issue public, or the RBI. I don't know who first broached this into the public, saying that there is a breach in the wall and there is a fight. I think both sides have a lot of things to repair on their own side. I will not take sides saying this is right or this is wrong, but I think this should have been behind doors. But now that it has happened, I think this fissure is permanent, because I think more and more we are seeing politicians wanting to control every facet of the economy, whether it is the banks or, I think the underlying problem is not addressed, whether the banks, even if you make them give more credit, are they able or in a good, or can they lend more? Nobody talks about those. Thank you.
Right. Just hold that thought there, because I'm going to take this across to Maithili. And Maithili, I think we are veering towards, I understand that, so give me a minute. I think we are veering towards a discussion which is now going into the realm of, is the government trying to control or not trying to control? I want to keep this strictly to the role of the board at the RBI and how it has changed over the years. We were in conversation with former Governor Raghuram Rajan, and he had some things to say, and I think it's only fair that I point some of those out. And he said that unlike the board of other entities, the RBI's board is not made up of professional supervisors or central bankers in that sense. And so their role needs to be one of advisory, one of counsel. They need to, like he said very famously, they need to play the role of Rahul Dravid and not a Sidhu, not interfere with management decisions, not interfere with decision making of the RBI. Many will say that's a valid argument to be made by people who are not who are not adept at policy making at the central bank. You've got you've got governors and deputy governors who are specialists asked to do the job. The board members are not specialists. So is this justified that they should largely play the role of advisors and wise counsels, the wise men and women who should be bridging differences really?
Well, yes, certainly every board is required to play the role of, wise counsel and advisory, etc. But frankly, the board could play a larger role if they were composed, if they had the right kind of people. Because under the earlier government, we saw Rajiv Gowda, a congressperson, being appointed to the board. Now we have Gurumurthy with RSS leanings being appointed to the board. So I think the problem lies with both the composition of the board and the role that the board has played in the past. I think that both could change if you had the right people to play. Because remember, when demonetization happened, everybody criticized the RBI Central Board for rubber stamping that decision. So if you had the right people, if you appointed professionals with knowledge of economics, of central banking, there is no reason why the bank could not play a larger role. Yes, as far as strictly technical matters are concerned, like take the matter of liquidity. Is the kind of liquidity, the situation prevailing today, is it right? Is it under? Is there too tight liquidity? Is it too loose the liquidity? That is a technical decision which perhaps RBI's professional management can take. But certainly if you had the right kind of people on the board, they would be able to advise you more generally on whether the liquidity situation needs to be augmented, whether it needs to be tightened. The precise numbers could be decided by the RBI's professionals, but the board could certainly play a better role, a larger role, if it comprised the right kind of people. Today we have a large number of vacancies and we don't have the right people. So I think it's a combination of things, Supriya, and though I'd agree partly with Raghuram Rajan, I don't think he's entirely right. The problem partly lies in the kind of people we have on the board.
Okay, fair point, and that points me into a different direction from the kind of people to is there a need to review the kind of people who are being put in? And Mr. Govind Rao, coming to you, given the fact that RBI, and I'm going to use a strong word here, the board has so far been a little defunct of sorts. They've basically been people who've gone with what the central bank wanted. Now with changing times, is there a need to, is there a case to relook and review the role of the board as well as the composition? Because many times in the past it has been said that, industrialists are on board, there is conflict of interest, many things cannot be discussed, a lot of items are not brought to the board level. Do you believe there is a larger need to review both the composition as well as the role that the board is playing?
You are right. I think you need to see. But then there is also a very important issue. I mean, should the RBI be doing so many things? That's the basic question. Should it be, I mean, it is a monetary policy authority, it is an exchange rate it has the exchange rate management, it has debt management, whole lot of, issues have been loaded onto it, and each one of them requires a lot of professional understanding of things. So obviously the day-to-day management and things like that, the board can only advise. For example, when the board talks about, when people talk about liquidity and PCAs and, and things like that, nobody talks about the security and safety of the depositors who will put the money in there. At the end of the day, the Reserve Bank has to take care of both the depositors' interest as well as the overall liquidity in the system. And it is a regulator. As a regulator, it is a specialized agency. Similarly, the exchange rate policy. Can the board have all these specialists who will determine what has to be done? I am afraid that has not been the case. But then certainly politicization of the board should not happen. I think you need to have people with people have with an objective view of things rather than filling the vacancies with the people.
But the irony, Mr. Govind Rao,
it's always
right.
It has to.
Right.
The last point is the
but
advice.
Mr. Govind Rao, the irony there is that to find people with objective views is a very subjective approach as well. I will go across to Mr. Balakrishnan because I also want to get some substantive issues answered. And now we are given to understand that in list of priority, in list of order of business, the government is likely to approach the central bank on the 19th and the list of priority will be PCA norms, NPA, MSME liquidity, NBFC liquidity and all of that. As far as PCA norms are concerned, Mr. Balakrishnan, the previous government and the tenure of the previous governor was being blamed to be looking away when those NPAs were being created. If you are indeed going to go and tweak PCA norms there, and I may agree with some parts of the suggestions being made that maybe we are too Basel compliant in some spheres, but we're also fairly Basel relaxant in many others. Are we then also encouraging this whole trend that though banks are under PCA, but you know what, if things need to be resolved, let's again make the central bank look away. Let's again relax guidelines. Is that a good signal we will be sending? Even though I appreciate liquidity concerns, Mr. Balakrishnan.
Well, I think the administration or of the banking in terms of credit, I think the RBI has not done a good job, does not covered itself in glory. I think the PCA is a kind of a desperate reaction which has come from them. I think we all know that if you do a fair accounting, I think all these PSU banks have almost negative capital. So I think it's a question of putting better things in place in those banks rather than just saying, I want some quantitative things to happen. So I think you cannot stop business from happening also. That is the other big concern. So the most important thing would have been to put better credit delivery systems, more honest systems in place, rather than put some numbers and saying you will not do any kind of lending for a few days or months till some things happen. And you're forcing the government to basically put in more and more capital. I think while capital does come in, I think the important thing is that RBI has not addressed the issue of competence, whether it's its own competence in supervising or of the bankers' competence in their being ability to lend money in a way that it comes back.
I think the other subject that I want to really touch upon is NBFC liquidity, and there has been such a tug of war as far as that is concerned. And Maithili, on that question specifically, Sanjeev Sanyal was with us, the principal economic advisor on ET Now, just on Friday, and he seemed to assert right here that the worst of the liquidity crunch is over and we are now in a better position. Now, that voice is coming in from somebody in the finance ministry, yes, in an advisory capacity, but he is the principal economic advisor. Could there then be a further push for more liquidity in the system? Because the detractors will say more liquidity will mean higher inflation, but the other side of the equation will be that numbers that came in just a while back is at 3.3%, and maybe there is some room for more liquidity.
But Supriya, let's also remember that ever since the Reserve Bank moved to inflation targeting, there's been a tendency to always keep liquidity tighter, simply because the RBI has taken inflation targeting as its main goal, almost a primary goal, ignoring the other aspects of what it is, essentially a full-service central bank. And if you look at the latest inflation numbers, just 3.3 for the month of October, certainly it would suggest that the RBI has perhaps kept liquidity tighter than was warranted. So though there is this natural tendency once you shift to inflation targeting to keep a very tight leash on liquidity, I think the RBI would be the best judge of that, but they need to be a little bit more relaxed about it. And remember, it is flexible inflation targeting. So they need not be so hung up, and every time when we repeatedly undershoot that 4%, then maybe there is a case, even if liquidity has eased up a little bit, to be open to the idea that whenever there are signs of liquidity being tight, remember in the 2008 crisis, we did open a special window for mutual funds. So this is not to say that there will be a case for special window for NBFCs, but I think RBI needs to be a little bit more relaxed in its approach to liquidity and not sit on its high horse, as I think it sometimes tends to do.
Okay, Mr. Govind Rao, it's a technical subject, and you know, all of your economists, and I'm sure you're better informed than me to take a call on this, but the reality is that the mandate of the central bank is to manage liquidity as much as price stability. Shouldn't RBI, which I agree is the subsidiary of the government, be left to do that? I mean, should that decision be guided by people on the board because they have an MSME, you know, and the other part is not just liquidity management, but as far as MSMEs are also concerned, MSMEs the world over cry for more funds. It's not as if this is unique or new to India. It's the ease of doing business, it's formalization that helps them do better. So as far as liquidity is concerned, do you still believe this should be a call made by the board or made by the government? And is RBI really being very stringent about it? Because and I agree with Maithili, if inflation numbers are anything to go by, and if liquidity management is concerned, the RBI has been fairly conservative. Is it perhaps time to loosen up a little bit?
why has this liquidity problem arisen? Why has this, why are the MSMEs are in difficulty? Isn't it not the policy, the government's, adventurism on demonetization and, wrong sort of GST without, your proper technology platform? Are these not responsible for what has happened? And you do this, and then now the Prime Minister comes up and says that we want to give MSMEs loan within an hour. Now you go on doing this type of a thing. What is the Reserve Bank supposed to do at the end of the day? I mean, the things have gone bad. The commercial banks are not able to, sort of manage their things, public sector banks. Now, obviously, they say that, look, let us safeguard the interest of the depositors, go slow on this lending. But then, but the point is, we don't want to correct anything on the policy side. We want to go on give away. I mean, it's all right, you are elected government. That doesn't mean that, when the markets fail, the governments come in. When the governments fail, what do we do? I mean, these are the institutions that have to take care of that. Well, in my view, Reserve Bank is the best judge to decide it. But mostly, I think there has to be a much greater interaction. It's not the bureaucrats of the finance ministry who have to deal with the governor. It's the finance minister has to deal with the governor and sort out these issues rather than allowing these bureaucrats who will go haywire. Right. I mean, that's what precisely seems to have happened.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that war of words, and that war of words is actually accentuating between the bureaucrats on one hand and the governor and the deputy governors on the other. But a quick last word to you, Mr. Balakrishnan. And while, we've spoken about liquidity, we've spoken about MSMEs and how the government perhaps may have put the RBI in this position, the real issue is of reserves. And on that front, it seems like the tension has dissipated. Because many people thought that the real bone of contention was reserves. Then, of course, many people came out in open contention and said, even Raghuram Rajan, who we got on the channel as former governor, said, it is not right for the government to do so, even though that money does belong to the government. In an election year, the RBI should know what to do with it. What is your own sense? Do you believe tension has dissipated there? And because what you hear from North Block and what you hear from the government now is nobody's asking for those reserves. So there's been a bit of a volte-face as far as that is concerned, from saying that money belongs to us to now saying we haven't asked for it.
Well, I don't know, Supriya, but Supriya, I really don't know whether it was just a kind of a red herring which was put to raise the bigger issue of a control or a check on RBI than really taking out money by the government in the form of dividends or any other thing. Because even if the reserves so-called had been built up over 70 years and you use a third or a fourth of it, it's like selling family silver to meet your daily expenses, which is not the best thing to have been done. And I think the Reserve Bank, the Government of India as a promoter can otherwise lay down a policy saying that of every year's profit, you have to distribute 60%, 70% as a dividend. So that is the way to go about it, rather than saying you got so much silver plus just sell it off. Because what is the Reserve Bank doing with that is stabilizing your currency also. And that money is also either given as a loan to the government by investing in government paper. So it is not that the Reserve Bank is just hiding that cash from the government. So I think it is a pointless.
No, fair point. Absolutely. And on that note, we will take a quick breather. But thank you very much, Mr. R. Balakrishnan, Mr. Govind Rao, and of course, Maithili Pasturmat for being with us and discussing what is going to be a very watched RBI board meeting come Monday the 19th. Thank you very, very much for sparing time and speaking to us.